Welcome back, fiber friends, to another episode of the Wool to Gold podcast. As you can see, I have some lovely dyed fiber here today, and we're going to be putting it onto the drum carder. But while I'm working on it, I'm going to tell you guys my most controversial spinning opinions. I got the request for this video a really long time ago, and at the time I just didn't feel like experienced enough as a spinner to have like really strong, developed, especially not controversial opinions. However, now that I'm kind of like into spinning, I do have a lot of controversial opinions that I think are, at least from what I've seen, possibly a little against the grain, but we're going to talk about them today. If you're curious about this fiber, this is some Santa Cruz Anna that I naturally dyed recently. Please don't come for this fiber or this dye job. The fleece itself was not, like, some of the fleece was in really good condition, right? And I washed that separately, and it's actually drying behind me. You can probably see it in frame. This is actually the wool that I think a lot of people would have probably opted to just completely separate or skirt off of the fleece. Some of the fleece I did skirt off. I actually still have that section. I'm probably gonna put it in like a nesting ball or something for like the local birds. But this wool, a lot of it was like lower on the legs, definitely a lot dirtier, so I had to scour it more. And I think as a result, because of that, it didn't take the dye like as consistently all the way through, as you can see. I just used Osage Orange and Cochineal Bugs. I got some Cochineal Bug dye for Christmas, and I really wanted to give it a try. So actually, the fuchsia part is the cochineal that has been mixed with soda ash, and then the orange is the cochineal with tartar added to it so that it brightened it up and was like a nice Christmas red, kind of like mixed intermittently with the Osage Orange because I wanted like an orangey color. So this is definitely some really dirty fiber. It's definitely not like the cream of the crop, but I do still want to card it up and spin it for myself. If you don't know, Santa Cruz Island is a really rare sheep wool, so I am just happy to have the opportunity to work with it, and I don't really want any of it to go to waste if I can help it. Okay, so my first controversial spinning opinion is that I hate short forward draw. I do. I don't like to use the word hate, and obviously I still short forward draw some yarns. Like, it's not that I can't do it, it's just not my preferred way of spinning. When I started spinning, I started with supported long draw. Like, that was the way that I intuitively tended to spin, and so as a result, it's just like not my preference. I also don't really like 100% worsted yarns. Like, I don't like a super heavy drapey yarn, and if you are already using combed top, which a lot of people use combed top, and you short forward draw it, you're just going to get exactly those results. You're going to get something that is definitely on the denser side and definitely on the drapier side. I like to make floofy, cushy, what I would call like sweater yarns, or yarns that I would like to wear in a sweater. Not to say that I don't try to incorporate some elements of like a worsted draft on them, because we all know that like woolen spun yarns, especially like true woolen spun yarns, have a tendency to pill, and so I like to definitely have a certain tightness to the spin, but I'm just not crazy about short forward draw with like comb top merino. That sounds like my nightmare spin, honestly, and I know that's a lot of people's dream spin, but I'm just not a fan of it. And then kind of in that same corridor, merino comb top is mediocre. It's just okay. I know that there are some people who are real sticklers for softness, but I always bring up that there are other breeds of sheep that are just as soft as merino. Merino is not the only fine wool sheep, and it really baffles me that people insist this. I also have seen a lot of discourse about people who say that the only sheep they're not allergic to is merino. And to this point, I would like to say that if that is true, there are a few explanations for this, but I think you're still more than likely not allergic to merino. There's a reasoning behind this. So like, more than likely the only fine wool that a lot of people have touched is merino, and then everything else that isn't merino they put in a category of being like medium to coarse, or even like carpet wool. And then so they haven't touched other soft wools, right? Polworth or Rambouillet. Then in addition, I also think that in a lot of cases what people are actually allergic to is not the wool but the lanolin. And I think a lot of the times, because merino is commercially and industrially processed, because it can be, because the farmers who raise the merinos often have enough fleece of all of the same consistent color to have it processed on that level. Those are going to true scouring facilities that have like all of the materials and the ability to like get every little bit of lanolin out of that fleece, whereas like the small hand spinner like myself, the like small time producer, maybe doesn't have as efficient of scouring methods or as effective or as thorough. That's why too, like you see a lot of people, including myself, complain. One of the things about merino top that I don't like is that it feels lifeless. It feels like it has no life in it. I think part of that is because there is truly like, there is not even like 0.1% lanolin left. And there are going to be some people who are going to say, well, like, that's how it's supposed to be. If there's any amount of lanolin left, then like your yarn's going to become hard and waxy over time. I don't really think that's true. I think there's a lot of like wiggle room in what can be defined as like a clean fleece versus a raw fleece. And while I like my fleeces to be definitely like on the cleaner side, I want my fleeces to be scoured and I don't want them to be sticky. I think that leaving like your wool doesn't need to feel like like dead hair. It really doesn't, in order to be clean. And so I just think that maybe that has to do with it too, that people are having an allergic reaction to the lanolin, and the only wools that they've interacted with that have had all the lanolin like properly scoured out of them is merino. That one's definitely more of a theory. I have no proof to support this whatsoever. It's just my take. And I think that merino is overrated. I've talked about this before. I think there are lots of other soft wools and rare sheep soft wools that are worth enjoying. Santa Cruz Island is a great example of that. I talked about it in my unboxing video, which I'll link below if you want to go watch me unbox this fleece and like talk a little bit more at length about the Santa Cruz Island sheep. However, these sheep have like some of the most consistently soft fleeces. They are incredibly fine, and in many ways kind of beat out merino in that way. Because what people don't realize too about the merino sheep is it's valued not just for its softness, but for its ability to produce a lot of fleece. Like that's what's special about merino sheep compared to other fine wool sheep. And many other fine wool sheep are still very wrinkly and have very dense follicle rates per like inch of skin. Merinos just have one of the densest. That's what's so special about them. It's not even that their fiber is uniquely soft. I think that's something that like the public just kind of like has misunderstood about merino wool. Okay, moving on from my controversial wool preferences, I don't think that you are any less of a spinner if you spin only thick and thin, or you only spin textured yarn or art yarn and you're not super concerned with consistency. I think that you are just as much of a spinner as somebody who spins a lot of like very commercial looking, conventional, even consistent handspun yarn. I see a lot of people kind of really overvalue the ability to spin like consistently, and while that is obviously like it's a good skill to have, I think a lot of people want consistent yarns, and a lot of people say, well, I'm only going to use consistent yarns. Totally valid. There's just like a lot of other skills to also learn, and you shouldn't devalue them just because it's not what you prioritize in your art practice. And I really think too, this comes from this place of also like overvaluing spinning really thin. I think spinning very thin is, again, like great skill to have. When I was a brand new spinner, it was definitely something that like it was a goal of mine to spin thinner and to spin more consistent, but it was also just as important to, you know, do the research and understand draft and, you know, how to do a proper thick and thin yarn, because there are like actual techniques that you can use to make very like hardy thick and thin yarns that won't fall apart on you. And I think in many ways it is in fact easier to ply, specifically the plying part. It's easier to ply these like commercial or conventional looking yarns compared to art yarns, and a lot of those art yarns take a lot of skill and a lot of time, and it's really annoying to see people like totally devalue them or call them like not real spinning. It's just kind of like funny to me, because in, again, a lot of ways they take a lot more technical skill and research and time. I think I definitely mastered like consistent yarn way before I mastered a lot of art yarns. But I don't see that kind of emphasized a lot. I see a lot of like the opposite opinion. People are really like, not everyone, there's definitely a large portion of spinners who are like very non-judgmental and are like, we're just happy to see people spinning, like they're very supportive of people's first spins. But there are also people who are like very judgy. They're like, well I spin cobweb weight yarn like exclusively. Okay, great. And that, you know, that brings me to another controversial opinion that I have. I think there's such a thing as too thin. I think there's such a thing as too thin of yarn. I don't care if you're plying it up. If I'm going to spend decades actually spinning these super lace weight cobweb singles to spend then decades plying them up, I just like don't get that. I don't understand. And I think a lot of people will argue that like, oh, well, this gets you like the most consistent yarn. I hear all the time compliments on this channel, compliments on other platforms about how consistent and even my 3-ply and 2-ply yarns are. I get people asking me for tutorial videos on how to make their yarn more consistent all the time. If I'm getting those compliments now, why the hell do I need to cobweb weight draft all of this yarn and then ply it up for what, an 8-ply like yarn that took me almost a year to spin? Like, I don't know. That just doesn't seem efficient to me or enjoyable. I don't really like, I am in yarn for the like active spinning as much as I am in it for the outcome, but like there needs to be some kind of outcome. Like, I don't want to just mindlessly spin super lightweight singles forever. That just like doesn't seem interesting to me. And if it's comforting and interesting to you and that is your preference, like that's fine. I just think that it's like not the be all end all of skills. I personally don't really want to do it because I've done it before. I've done that before, and it's really like those yarns, I didn't even really like how they came out. They all ended up on my shop. They all ended up selling, and I really had to like underprice them for the labor that I put into them, because at the end of the day, when you have to like ply up, like great, let's say you have 6,000 yards of singles, but if you need to make it a 6-ply yarn for it to even be like DK weight, then you only end up with 1,000 yards after spinning 6,000 yards. Like I don't want to do that. It's hard to be able to charge a price for those yarns that is fair to both the maker and like to the consumer, because realistically, like I do want the yarns that end up on my shop to sell, because that is a way of continuing to be able to get art supplies and pay bills and all of those fun things. I'm gonna try to end on a really positive note for this one. I'd say like my least controversial but still considered controversial among some circles opinion when it comes to spinning is that you are just as much of a spinner if you just buy like hand-dyed top from other people, or even like, again, commercially processed top, not even like hand-dyed, and you exclusively spin that. You are just as much of a spinner as somebody who buys whole sheet fleeces and cleans them and dyes them and prepares them to be worked with just like myself. I know that this might not seem like a controversial opinion, especially if you're brand new to spinning, but if you don't know, there are certain like hand spinner certificates and things like that that you can get, and a lot of them involve like all of the steps of spinning, and they kind of demand that you know how to card and comb and wash and scour and dye, especially, and dye your own fiber. And this thought process comes from a time when hand spinning, for many years now, hand spinning has not been popular. It has not had a moment in the sun. Like cool, interesting people like myself and the other cool hand spinners you see on here were not, you know, participating in it in a really like, in a way that was available on social media and has sort of like made it proliferate. I really do think that like, I am very thankful for social media, because I think it has made things like knitting and crochet and now spinning like gain a little bit more popularity as we move into like the 2030s. I'm really hoping that we have a really cool just like arts and crafts boom coming soon in general. But if you want to hear me talk about that and some of my 2025 or just like the next 5 years, the next decade, what I predict is going to be cool and the trends in knitting and crochet and spinning and fiber arts in general and a little bit in fashion, then check out the next video where I'm going to continue processing this fleece because it's just a beast. It's super dirty. As you can see, we have not gotten very far. I have maybe carded like a quarter ounce, probably not even, if we're being honest here. So catch me on the next video if you want to see more and if you want to hear me yap about that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.